Talking about the interim ministry. We're not talking about the settled ministry, which is happening in 2 years, right? We're talking about Deborah Hafner, there she is going to be talking about the interim ministry itself, the 2 years, what happens during the 2 years while we have an interim minister, what their focus is, what the reason for having an interim minister is, all of that kind of stuff. Then I'm going to be talking about the procedure, it's very specific procedure to get up to the point where we've chosen that interim minister. And we're going to be open for questions and answers. Okay? So, without further ado, here's Deborah.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on, you guys know me better than that. Good afternoon. Thank you. So, I thought it'd be interesting if, just to get a sense of sort of our own experience with this, would you raise your hand if this is the only UU church you've been a member of? Okay. And would you raise your hand if Frank is the only senior UU minister you have had? Okay, so, no, there are a few of you who've been through.
I've been here 44 years.
You've been here, right, a few of you who've been here through, but what did you just notice about that? So for the majority of us, this church is the only church we know, and Frank Hall is the only minister that we have had in a senior minister position. I think that says a lot about why some of us are feeling so anxious, why we feel so much concern, because the church as we know it, this congregation as we know it, has been Frank's congregation. And that's our relationship. And so what I actually really want to do with this presentation is in sharing with you about interim ministry and what interim ministers do, is to let you know we're going to be okay. It is going to be all right. We are not the first congregation in the UUA to go through an interim process. We are not the only congregation that has had a long-term ministry that needs to change. And it is not only in the Unitarian Universalist Association, but every denomination faces these issues. And this is where interim process has taken place. So I want to thank those of you who are here. I understand this is being taped so that people who are already eating soup in Bridgeport will be able to pick up some of this as well. I took training last summer to become an interim minister. There are 3 weeks you take as an interim minister. I've taken the first week. The next weeks are available after you've actually served churches as an interim. And I did it for a couple of reasons. One is, as you all know, it looked for a while last year like I didn't have a job that paid money, so I thought getting interim training would be a good thing to have in my pocket. But I also thought it would be helpful to us as a community for me to actually be more aware and involved with what that process was. So I have been asked to share with you some of what I've learned, which will both help us prepare for an interim, understand what the interim will do with us, and help prepare us. And what I want to say is, with all humility, I have taken the 1 week course in this. We did do a lot of reading, but I do not stand here as an expert with all the answers, and I may not be able to answer all the questions that come up, but I'm going to share with you what I learned, and a lot of what I learned was really a surprise to me. So what I want to start with is what an interim is not, okay? And what an interim is not is a placeholder between one minister and another. I think there's a tendency to think about that this person will come in and all that they're doing is getting us from Frank to the next person. So yes, the interim will lead worship on most Sundays, and will co-lead worship with Ed and I on holidays. The interim will perform rites of passage and limited pastoral care, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the main responsibility of the interim, and this is a quote from the Alban Institute, the main responsibility of the interim is to empower the congregation to arrive at a maximum state of spiritual health so that the next ministerial relationship has maximum possibility of success. All right, I'm going to read that again. It is to empower the congregation to arrive at a maximum state of spiritual health so that the next settled ministerial relationship has a maximum possibility of success. So if we were in search now for a settled minister, the likelihood is that that person would fail by definition and time of us not being prepared to enter into a new long-term settled process with somebody. Now, there are 4 types. They describe 4 types of interim situations, and I think we sort of fit in 2 of them. And the way they're defined is as the betrayed, the benumbed, the bereft, and the bequeathed. So the betrayed is the congregation where the clergy person has done something really terrible, where there's been misconduct, where there's been embezzlement, where the match is so bad that minister is asked to leave by the congregation, and you can imagine how badly that would feel. The benumbed congregation is the congregation that has run out of juice, so that the minister in that congregation feels, I can no longer do my work with this congregation. People are not enthusiastic, they're not really working, they're not really involved, and the minister leaves, and the new person's challenge is, how do you re-engage? How do you re-excite them? The bereft congregation can be a congregation where the minister dies. So in the middle of minister, and I actually have just learned there are actually several UU ministers who have died in the pulpit while preaching. You can only imagine, right? But the other part of bereft is a congregation, and I think we will fit into some of this, which is that I think we're going to experience a lot of grief and a lot of needing to let go of our time with Frank. And the bequeathed is the congregation that, in fact, the minister is either retiring or minister has reached a point in their own ministry. I have several colleagues right now who have been in medium-sized congregations who are ready to serve larger congregations, for example. Or people who have been working in big congregations and really are starting to edge to retirement and they want to do smaller ones. There's that, we have that kind of bequeathed idea as well. The fact is, and so what I want to tell you is that we should not expect that we will all be handling or thinking about this transition in the same way. We know, and this, I named the elephant in the room, that there has been a fair amount of conflict over the issue of Frank leaving over the past 3 to 5 years. We've had some conflict with previous associates, so that there is conflict that needs to be brought up and taken out into the light of day that continues as a shadow here. And some people here, that will be a big part of this. For others of you right now, you're going, I don't have a clue what she's talking about, all right? And that's part of organizational system. So the interim is really here, and the reason we look at a 2-year interim, and a couple of people have said to me, well, we're gonna go through 2 people. The goal is for us to find, for the committee to find somebody who will clearly be here for a 2-year process. In the first year, that person's job is to help us deal with some of that grief, and to help us deal with loss, to help us deal with the anxiety, to help us deal with change. One of the things that we read talked about how we need to deal with the ghost, that there will be a sense of Frank as present even when Frank has left, and that we need to be openly and honestly dealing with that. And then the first year, the interim will be dealing with issues that have been left, and we have some of those, as well as identifying needs. The second year of the interim is to prepare us for our future, to re-envision who we are, what is our mission, what is our ministry, what is our goal as a congregation. And that's really about looking for this time as an opportunity for a new model, a new identity, a new ministry. That's also why, for those of you who have said to me, can't you just be our interim minister? That's also why that would not be appropriate, nor would it be a good idea to bring back somebody from our past to come in for the interim, because we want somebody who can help us look at who are we going to be in this next stage of our congregational life. So there are these two jobs, and you can hear, right, why you need the same person to do both of them. You need that year of analysis, and then you need the year of preparing us for the next step. There are 6 steps that interims are trained to take. And so when I learned these, I thought, well, it'd be really good if we as a congregation knew what those steps were, because this person's going to be trained to do them. The first thing the person has to do is to join us and to enter into our system and get to know us. And so there will be things that will happen next September that are specifically designed to introduce us to this person. But the second part, which will be for that person then to really concentrate on system analysis. What are our successes? What are we sad about? What are we ready to give up? What opportunities are there? What needs to be done next? And the interim will be looking at things like our history, our neighborhood, our role in our community. What kind of processes do we have in place? How are we doing managerially? What are our programs? What works, what doesn't work? And we've done a little bit of that in the appreciative inquiry that Jim Francic has had us doing, but you can expect that we'll be doing much more of that next year, and that there will be all sorts of opportunities for us to give input to people, to this person. The second thing that person will be doing next year, and then in the following year as well, is focusing on the pastoral role. So in fact, we will get used to someone new in the pulpit and with a new style. And I've just come back from the UUMA, the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, had a 5-day institute. And I have to tell you, Frank is a fantastic preacher. There are many fantastic preachers out there. I heard brilliant preaching all week, and all very different. So that person will indeed do preaching and rites of passage. One of the interesting things the person said, they taught us, was that one of the most important things that the interim will actually do relatively early on in their ministry with us, it will be very important for that person to do a memorial service for somebody, so that we can feel trust that that person can hold us in love and ministerial skills. We're not asking anyone to volunteer for that. But in the life of the community, to know that our pastoral needs will be met. Now, one of the things, though, is in all that time that person's going to be doing the systems analysis, they are not going to have a lot of time to be doing pastoral care, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The fourth thing they're supposed to be looking at is how do we connect to the denomination as a whole, and I think it's fairly clear to many of us that we are somewhat insular here in Westport, that there are a lot of people who belong to the Unitarian Church in Westport, but don't see a larger role to how we fit into a national movement. And so one of the things interims are supposed to do is to help look at those areas. And then in that second year, to start really working with us to evaluate where we are and what are we looking for in that next settled ministry. And there are a lot of different ways we could go when we start thinking about who we want to serve, who do we want to have serve us next for our settled ministry. And so we're going to be having the opportunity to provide input into that. And then that person, the last task is actually to exit and say goodbye. One of the most important things to keep in mind about interim ministry is that that person is, the expression is pre-fired. There is no way that that person will be with us for more than 2 years. No matter how much we love him or her or her, that person is not staying with us. And so knowing that that person can take risks that a settled minister can't take, and can perhaps, and I have no bias about this, but perhaps do some of the hard things to get ready for the next minister. So the example that's often used in books, and again, this is not, I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about anything specific here, but if there was an issue, for example, with a staff person that nobody's been willing to deal with because that staff person's been here forever, an interim might say, that person's going before the new person comes in. Or if there is a program or a policy that's no longer serving us, or a policy that's missing, the interim may say, let me get this out of the way so that the next person can come in and not have to deal with this. Now, let me tell you what an interim does not do. The first thing the interim does not do is the interim does not select the next minister. The interim has absolutely no role at all. You are counseled, even if your best friend is applying for the job, you are not to comment either to the congregation or to that person. Conversations with the interim and the next person take place after the settlement, after we would go through candidating and have picked somebody, so that in fact you are paying attention just to the congregation. The second thing the interim is not supposed to do is to set a long-term strategic plan. Nor, according to most of the literature I've read, should the congregation. And we're in kind of an interesting place because we've been working on a vision plan, and there are a lot of people in looking at congregational systems who would say we need to at least that we're probably off in terms of timing on that, but at least we need to look at that as a draft, as a suggestion, because a new minister is going to perhaps take us in different ways. And the outside look that we're going to be getting next year and the following year may actually reveal to us that there's something really critical we haven't been thinking about, or some way we've been going that needs to be altered, and so we need to be open to that. And then the last thing is what the interim may not do is apply for the job. Okay, so they not only, they come in, they're not allowed. So what does a congregation need in place? First is, and I think this is really important, is people need to understand what the role of the interim is. And that will include, there will be a contract with the interim, which I'm expecting will be shared with the congregation, so we know exactly what that person's job is. The board has a very strong role this year in trying to figure out what the role of the interim is. For those of you who were here during during one of our previous associates who was trained as an interim came in as an interim, there was a great deal of conflict because his understanding of what his job was, as I've just defined it, was not the understanding that was shared with the congregation. And so we have to keep in mind this person's job is to prepare our spiritual health for the next phase and to help us understand what we need. The second thing we're going to need is a strong pastoral care team. We're really going to need to beef up our circles. We're going to need to beef up our team of trained people who can do pastoral care. That interim is going to be spending, in the time that you're spending doing that analysis, you're not making all the hospital visits. You know, you're not doing all the counseling. And so one of the challenges I've given to the board is to think about how are we going to have those needs met. And then what we will need eventually is, over this next period of time, is a clear written agreement with the former minister about Frank's future role with us. Making Frank an emeritus is a separate process from defining Frank's role to the interim and to the next settled minister, which is an agreement between colleagues, and then the agreement between the congregation and the emeritus. And I'm really glad we're working on the emeritus status, but I want you to know that at least best practice would be to keep the honorific part of that separate from the functionality part of that. And we can make Frank an emeritus without telling the new ministers what their role together should be. So Kristen's going to go over with you what the process is. What I'll just want to say is it's a very short process. Unlike the search for a settled minister, which will take us the better part of a year, this process actually telescopes down into April to May. And by, I think in soundings it said May 15th, but if the match is good, it will actually be by May 3rd is when Boston releases these matches. What I want to share with you is something I shared with the board, which is it is really important for us to be open to this process. So if you have ministers who are friends or people that you know, I'm going to encourage you, do not invite people to apply for this. We shouldn't be pre-selecting people. We really want to trust that by the process that Kristen's going to go over and what Boston will do with us, that we will have the opportunity to get the best person out there for us. I want to just share with you my observation when I went to the training is that there are 3 very different kinds of interims out there. There are the interims who are people who get fellowshipped by the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, which I have the privilege of serving on, at the end of March or April, and so they are out of sync with the settlement process. The settled ministers are all picked by March 15th, and so these are new people and they need jobs in September, so that's one kind of person. Then there's the person who sometime between January, February, March, and April realize that they can no longer be in their current congregation, and so they go into the interim process because they need a job in September and they can't stay where they are. And one of the things I watched was a little bit of, it kind of looked to me like shifting the chairs on the Titanic, where somebody had done badly someplace, so they were being moved to where somebody else had not done well either. And the third type of interim minister, though, is what I think we want, which is the person who has made this their career, either a second career. They were a parish minister who, after serving a long-term or several long-term parish ministries, are now ready to, in fact, do this work. And there are people who are called to interim ministry who don't want 20-year or 10-year. They want to come in for 2-year and do this diagnostic work, and then they want to move on. And my particular bias would be that that's what we want. We want that skilled, experienced person who has taken a large congregation through this process after a long-term ministry. I want to talk just very quickly about my role to the interim, which is that my role to the interim is the same as my role has been to Frank, which is to be a colleague. The community ministers, and as well as associate ministers, ministers of music, our job by our code of conduct, our code of ethics, is to support the senior minister. And so the first thing I will do with whoever we choose is to ask how I can be helpful. I will continue to, what I do is I tithe my time to the Unitarian Church in Westport, as do many of you, as a volunteer. And so I will continue to be available for short-term counseling, safe congregations work. And Ed and I are also available to you all for rites of passage for those of you who we are in significant relationship with. But you also need to know, if you ask us to do your wedding or your baby naming or your memorial, we are obligated to make sure that that interim minister would be okay with that. But it is a role that we can play here. Okay, I'm going to end on one last thing, which is what's your role in all this? And the first thing I'm going to ask you, I think I'll write a soundings column on this too. My first thing, your role is, I want to ask you to trust the process. I want you to remember that we are not making this up, that there is indeed a process, and we need to stay informed informed about that process. I think we really need to work hard on rumor control. I think we're already hearing and seeing, or I guess hearing some of that. I think we should try not to triangulate, and so that means if you don't know something, go to the people, and Kristen can talk to you about who are the people who can answer the questions. And we have a lot of committees right now. I'm a little concerned just that we have the Ministerial Transitions Committee, and we have the Interim Committee, and we have the board, and it's going to be really important that we're all working on the same page and same process. Last year during the crisis I went through, I didn't know this, I learned that expression, stay calm and carry on, from the World War II in England. What I want to tell you is that the staff is staying, okay? We right now do not anticipate that any of our staff are leaving. So in fact, we do have stability for next year, and I think we can trust that. I'm going to suggest that to people that we remember that we are a covenantal community and that we need to hang in during this next couple of years, that we need to be open to what's going to happen. You may or may not love this interim minister as your minister. You need to remember that that's really, that person's job is not to do that. And again, I think that's where Ed and I perhaps can be helpful to some of you, but to hang in through the process. I want to encourage you when there are opportunities to participate in the process of assessment that we do that. I also want to encourage you to think about how you and your various groups can extend hospitality to this new interim. One of the things I don't quite get about the career interim people is I feel like they have to be really lonely. So someone's going to show up here in Westport, Connecticut, or in Fairfield County, probably knowing no one. And how we get that person and extend our own personal hospitality. And what we've been told is those first weeks of ministry are particularly important so that the person feel welcome and at home. I think we need to recognize that change is hard. And for some of us, change is harder. And for some of us, based on whatever transitions that are going on in our life, this is actually going to even feel harder. So we need to be caring for each other. And I will end and turn it over to Kristen to say, I think we need to really practice the affirmation during this process. So to seek the truth in love and to help one another. Thank you.
That was inspiring. Thanks, Deborah. Yes.
Deborah Hafner. I'm new here.
Oh,
And you're very dynamic. Thank you.
There you go. Good. Well, that was a great overview of what's going to happen, what the process is, when the interim is here, and what our role is with that. What I'm going to talk about now, and you'll have a chance to ask Deborah questions later on when I'm finished, and we can, take all questions at once. But what I wanted to talk about is just the process of getting to the point where we actually have somebody here, and what does that look like. And as Deborah said, it's a very specific, short process. We'll be done early May. So that's a good thing, but it's also very concentrated in terms of energy and responsibility and what's happening. I have a great search committee. Some of them are here. We've got Ralph Tartaglione and William McAvoy and Randy Burnham and Ann Canna. I don't think there's anyone else here. Ted Yang could not be here today, but he's on the search committee. Denny Davidoff also was unable to be here, and she's on the search committee. And we have our de facto Chuck Coletti sits in with us also on this meeting. Am I missing anybody? I think that's it. Why did we pick that particular committee? I think some people are wondering. Hiring an interim minister is a board decision as defined by the UUA. It is just like hiring a business manager for the church. This is not a person that's called by the congregation. It's really strictly a board decision, and in the end will be that. We in the search committee will come up with who we think is the best person for the board to approve. And that's what will happen in the end of the process. But we decided that it should not be a complete board decision in terms of the whole process of thinking about these people and what we're getting together. So the committee is made up of 4 board members and 3 congregants. As you know, Ann and William and Ralph are not on the board. And we feel really good about their input and perspectives that are coming into this. I want you to know that if you have any questions at all about this process, you can go on the UUA website and find all the information that we're reading. It's not that, we have this magical knowledge all of a sudden. If you go to the UUA website and search on ministerial transitions or transitions alone, you'll come up with all the information that we're reading on this. And there's a transitional minister handbook that I've printed out, but it's got lots of great information. So if you have any questions as we're going through this process, please go online and look at these things, or contact any of us during the next couple of months and let us know what you're thinking and what you're concerned about. As Deborah and I have just said, the process is very specific and clear. So I'm going to lead you through that process now. And let me get there. We're currently meeting about every 2 weeks, and the search committee is charged with filling out this application. So we are going to put in an application to the UUA as a congregation looking for an interim minister. And the interim ministers that are in the process this year will be submitting applications to the UUA at about the same time in April. And then we're all going to get connected, okay? So our application is 4 pages. It's got all sorts of information on everything from the demographics of the congregation to, what do we think our strengths are as a congregation? What do we think we need to work on in the future? Do we have 2 services or just 1? Do we have an RE program? It's just all kind of, how do we describe our congregation? What's it about? What's our operating budget? How many pledging units we have? Just all those details we've been putting together. They want to see a full ministerial history of back to 1970 of who our ministers have been, how long they were there, and reasons for them not being here anymore. So it's a description of us. It's telling them who we are. We could have that application in on April 10th at the latest. But our committee has really been working hard, and we anticipate that we're going to be able to turn that application in by the end of next week. So we're really in good shape in terms of timing. We're going to get the application in, and middle of February, the UUA will have it, and everything will be good. Hopefully the interim ministers are, they're working on the same thing. Another project that we are working on right now is creating an e-packet that will be on our website. And it's more information, it's community information, and so that they can look at what a soundings looks like and an order of service, and they can see all the stuff. And to be frank, we're going to use the template that we had on there for the DRE search last year as a template that we'll edit and manipulate and make appropriate for an interim minister, not the DRE, but it's a nice starting point, and Charles has put it up on the computer, and we're starting to work on that e-packet that we're going to submit. They are creating their own packets so that we can see, what they look like also. What else are we going to have in there? The annual reports. Just a bunch of information about us. So then what happens is on April 11th, our application will be put out to the interim ministers. They're submitting their applications on April 1st to the UUA. I should say at this point, we're getting a lot of support from the UUA. In fact, in March, our search committee is going to be meeting with a man named Keith Cron, who is the director of ministerial transitions. He's coming to meet with us, along with a man named Craig Hirschberger, who... Oh, I'm sorry.
They're both ministers, Keith and Craig.
Right. I am sorry. Anyway, they're both coming and to talk with us. And would you remind me again what Craig's title is? It's ministerial
No, she's the Union District of Metro New York's settlement rep.
The settlement rep. So the settlement representative is somebody we will be working on with much more closely when we talk about getting our settled minister in 2 years. But the UUA is so invested in our health as a congregation that they're sending both of these people to talk to us now. So I want you to feel comfortable in the fact that they know who we are, they want us to be healthy, and they're doing everything that they can to help us get to that point. We've got great assistance from our district executive named Andrea Lerner. I talk to her once a week. So anyway, I just want to make sure that you know that the UUA is really going to help us with this process. So all of those applications that I was talking about will be going to Keith Cron, and he will be giving us from that pool. Remember, there's this pool of interim ministers. It's not like a huge number of people that are even appropriate for us to be looking at. And then that pool can be divided down even further to that third kind. The person that's trained to do this has already transitioned another large congregation after a long-term minister. So the people that we're going to be looking at, it's not a huge list. And Keith will be getting us probably 5 applications that he thinks would fit into our congregation based on our application and his talks to us in March. Then we have to get to work really quickly, because between April 22nd and May 3rd is the time that we have to interview these people. We have to do background checks on these people. We need to do, well, probably not the background check yet, but the referrals, go through all their referrals and talk to people. We're going to be Skyping, doing Skype interviews with them. We need to pick who we think would be appropriate to bring in here to meet with the board. And then from then, we will make our decision on May 2nd or 3rd. So it's a really quick process. Some people had questions about how we're coming up with financial information and salary information on these people. And I just as a reassurance, I just want to let you know what the UUA does with all that. They've divided all the congregations up, and historically it's been 5 geographical areas based on salary, cost of living, different things like that. This summer in July, they've actually had to expand to 2 more areas. So that being said, all you need to know is that we are in, as of July, geographic area 6. And you're welcome to look at this later. There are very specific recommendations for salary and housing for geographic index 6 and a congregation of our size. So it's all divided up, and we will be working within the recommendations of the UUA in terms of what the salary recommendations for this person will be. So the calendar, the finances, talking about it as a board decision. As Deborah said, we already have a lot of good stuff in place, you know, with our whole future story and the inquisitive inquiry that we've been talking about. The candidates that we're looking for will know that we are able to do that. We're not a congregation that shies away from being able to inspect our belly buttons and figure out what it is we really want. And I think that will be attractive. And I think it's going to be a great process. If any of you, I hope you get to know the people on the committee and will entertain support for them and ask them questions and just keep open conversation. Please let us know if there's anything at all that's you're wondering about as this process goes on. I was wondering if anybody on the committee wanted to add anything else, or that if I've left something out completely, like announcing this meeting this morning. No? Does it cover everything? Yes.
I just had a question about how you go about choosing the non-board members to serve on the committee and the future committee.
And the future committee, you mean for the settled minister?
Yeah.
You know what, I can't speak to that right now. I'm not sure how we're going to be choosing the people to be on the committee for the settled minister. I would be speaking out of hand if I said anything about that.
But how did you get the ones that are serving now?
At the board meeting, we came up with a list of names of people that have been actively interested in the process and have been talking to. And we actually called more people that are currently on the search committee, and 2 people turned us down. So then we were calling these 3 people, and they agreed to be on. So it was at a board meeting that we went through a list. Randy?
Yeah, we were interested in making sure that people who were on the search committee had constituents within the congregation.
Yeah.
So Ann has been very involved with religious education. Ralph is head of the social justice circle, and William's head of adult education in Odyssey. And so it was to make sure that there was representation of the program, and that was not covered by the board.
Can everybody hear Randy? Do I need to pass a mic?
Yes.
Yeah? Is it working?
Yeah.
Does Randy need to repeat that, or do you want me to summarize what he said? No? Okay. We wanted a representative from the congregation. Yes, Elaine.
So are you ready for another question? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Is everybody ready after Randy's question? Yeah? Yes.
My understanding is that Frank's time as our minister, Frank's time goes to August or through August, so I was just wondering when the new minister starts. They're just like they abut each other, or if there's an overlap, or...
Right. Frank will actually be done June 30th.
Correction. Frank will be on board. Frank's contract ends as of August.
Okay.
Not sure if it's August 15th or August 30th, but it goes to August. He will be leaving the pulpit in June.
That's the name I have. And then the interim minister will be starting in August, so that there's some time to get used to the church and all that stuff before September rolls around and we get busy. Charles?
Maybe it's not the time to ask, but I was wondering, in the future, probably once Frank's retirement occurs, what happens with the website as per all of the sermons and the Dear Friends? Because I know if suddenly somebody goes there, say in September, and they're not there, I can imagine the clamoring. So
That's a good question. I am not sure. We'll have to work on that, Charles. I hadn't even thought about that yet. Deborah, do you have any feelings about that?
I can't imagine that an archive of Frank's sermons would be problematic to
Right.
a new interim or a settled.
Yeah, I expected that they were going to be archived. It's just that I didn't know exactly, other congregations, how they went about it, that the leave taking, even if they had emeritus, exactly what they did.
Good question. Somebody will get, I think that it's one of those things that we will have to deal with as time goes on, but, so the reason for emeritus status is because we want to both formally recognize Frank's role with us, and his important contributions to us individually and as a congregation. And so the goal is not to disappear him, I think that the goal is to enable him to move on and us to move to a new minister while we continue to honor and celebrate his gifts. And so I don't know the exact answer to your question, but again, that's a place where I would think that Boston and the folks who do this all the time will be able to give us appropriate guidance.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, please do. Yes.
Hi there. It's okay. This is not really a question. This is, I guess I want to put my 2 cents in here. I've been a member of many congregations, and been on search committees, and I've been through this process. And I want to encourage all of you who are involved in this to understand that you are representing us, not the UUA. And if the UUA says something that you think doesn't work here, you have every right, maybe every obligation, to do something else.
Thank you. Yes, Beck.
I'm just curious, do you actually get to hear any sermons or read any of the sermons?
They should be submitting sermons with their packet, their e-packet themselves. So hopefully we'll be hearing sermons. We will certainly ask for sermons.
Let me make a comment about that, which is the world has now changed to a place where my colleagues in ministry are actually all having to become webmasters. So just the last time we were in search, we would have looked at written packets. Candidates are now preparing websites, and there's a place you pay $300 and they do a website template, and you actually put up people having filmed you do sermons, and you have podcast sermons, and your newsletter articles, and I mean, I've worked with a number of my colleagues now in terms of people saying, could you look at my online presence? So it's actually, I would be very surprised if we actually can't watch people, this committee couldn't actually watch people deliver sermons, certainly listen to sermons. These people are coming with track records, so that we'll actually be able to get a very different view now than you might have just been able to do on paper, a few years ago.
I don't think it was clear, or perhaps I didn't hear clearly. There are 3 choices of categories of interim ministers.
No, those are my categories.
Oh,
so.
okay. How does the UA, how does Unitarian Church of Westport guide the discussion to selecting one of the more seasoned versus the fellow and that person that has moved on for other reasons?
I think Keith, again, I've talked with Keith, I don't know if you all know this, but we are like really a plum congregation. We are seen as maybe not in the top 5% of congregations, but clearly in the top 10% of congregations out there. We will have no trouble getting really great people applying for this job, and surely no problem at all for the next job. The 3 most, in this year's search for settled ministry,
The 3 plum jobs are Concord, Massachusetts, which the reason Concord is plum is it's over 1,000 people, but it's been there since something like 1665. St. Louis, Missouri, and the congregation that got the most applications this year was Burlington, Vermont. So only to say, now we can't know who in 2 years is going to, our competition is going to be for the really best ministers, but I'm really not too worried. I mean, I think that we will be seen as a really great place for those seasoned people, and no one is going to give us a new seminary graduate to come and be one of the candidates, nor would this committee accept such a person. So there is a two-way process. I actually have a question I don't know the answer to, which is, we pick person A, and person A decides that they want to go to Hawaii. What happens then?
Well, if that's, then you go into round 2 of discussions which is a little bit later in May. So
That's
there
why it
are,
could take that long.
yeah, it could take longer if, if we want somebody and they don't, they want to be warm for the next 2 years, it would be something different, and we would go into round 2 of the candidates. Yes.
Do you have any idea as to how many congregations are going through this process now, and how many ministers there are who are seeking interim placements? Like how big are both pools?
We don't know right now.
We'll
Hopefully
know
we'll find when we talk to
know,
Keith.
and we'll know in April.
Yeah.
The list of ministers, for congregations and churches listed on the Transitions website, and it's 30 or 40. I went to it yesterday, so it's a large
Great.
number.
Thank you, Linda.
I can kind of answer Elaine's question in quasi-way. On the district's website, there's this special category of counseling or interim ministry opportunities. Usually regular jobs like RE, business administrator, they go directly to me. I don't think I've ever received an application to put on the website other than it coming from Andrea Lerner or Lori Golson, the district administrator. It's one of the least ones that I wind up putting up, and I keep them on the server, maybe not listed, for Andrea Lerner's to be able to look back on. But at any one time, at the most, there's been 3.
In our district, you're specifically
within the
just
district.
within this district. That doesn't have anything to do with the nationwide listing of people. Yes.
I would like to know why the process of the window between when you select a person and the time that you actually accept a person is so small. It's just like almost only 3 weeks or even less. Why not more?
Yeah, so part of it has to do with, as I understand it, which is with the settled ministry schedule. So the matches for the settled ministers take place by March 15th is when those first offers, and everyone gets made an offer at the same time, so that people know. So all of the ministers who are looking for jobs. So that period. So those people then who don't get jobs then become part of the interim pool. So it all becomes very short because you want to have it settled before your church year ends. And it is. It does feel. I mean, it must feel to you guys. It's a very
10 days.
It's a really, really busy, fast process. And the UUA is actually looking at moving settlement to happening twice a year instead of just once a year, because if it's problematic on the congregation level, you can only imagine on the denomination level how problematic it is. It's a little bit like if any of you've had either yourself or have had children who've gone through the medical search process. It's very much that kind of like, okay, ready, set, go, and you see if people match up, you're good. If you don't match up, you need enough time to take care of the other people.
My guess is that you would prioritize, wouldn't you? I mean, if you select one person and you know what the other pool looks like, that you have some sense of, you know, wow, if this person doesn't come, here are some other options that we want.
Sure. Absolutely.
But they all want to go to the first, they want to go to from the minister's side, the minister wants to go to where they're first picked, right? So that's where
and they probably have priorities too.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's where, again, it becomes this matching process.
It's actually this short-term period on the minister's side is known as the feeding frenzy.
I was curious about your answer. It didn't sound quite right to me. It seems to me it's at least conceivable that a minister would take our congregation even if he or she wasn't our first choice. And yet he may not have that opportunity as you described the process, because he's already taken someplace where he is the first choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we may not get our first choice under the circumstances.
There's no
It's
way,
possible.
you know, that's where we want to be the best congregation we can be, right? But yeah, it's a confusing, and it's also why this is not the settle process, which we're not prepared to talk about today, but that process goes on, is a much more extended process, and that's where the person, you know, we have pre-candidating weekends, and then the person comes for a week and lives with us, and you know, it's a much more drawn out process. Again, remembering that most of these people are coming with, the people we're going to be looking at are going to be coming, I would think, with a similar set of skills and backgrounds. So again, I can't say that, I can't promise you, but my gut says that all 5 people that Keith will give us will be people who could do our job effectively and well.
You know, to address your concern there, Bob, one of the things the committee is going to have to do in the interview process, part of the process is going to be making sure that the person we're interviewing is going to say yes. It's going to be subtle, but if, you know, we're going to ask if they like warm weather. And if they say yes, maybe not. So it's really it's going to be part of the process for us, as in that 11 days of interviewing, that we only make the offer to somebody who is going to say yes. So that will definitely be a factor in how we make this decision.
Any other questions? Yes.
I just want to thank all of you for the hours that you're spending and this articulate meeting. It's just been fabulous.
I appreciate it. Let's definitely keep open communication. Any questions at all, please let us know.
And as I understand it, so Deborah's been taping, and we will make this link available through the e-card and soundings and whatever. So
please tell.
We would really, from my perspective, I would have liked every member of the congregation to have been here today.
Yeah.
So I think you all can help encourage people to actually make sure that they know what's going on. We will do this so much better if we understand what the process is and what's going to be happening.
Yeah. So please tell everybody to go on. It'll be available for them to listen to and watch also, whatever they want to.
Now go eat soup.